Hey everyone, my name is Rahat. I hope you all are doing well. I am the host of the video series Mainframe Voices. As the name suggests, we are creating a video series where we gather different perspectives of experts on mainframe technology and mainframe modernization. Our goal is to highlight the importance and future of mainframe in today's technology landscape. In this episode of Mainframe Voices, we explore the key priorities for successfully implementing DevOps in a mainframe environment. Leading such an initiative involves careful planning and strategic focus. Our expert will share their top three priorities to ensure a smooth transition, addressing critical aspects such as integrating DevOps tool, maintaining security, and fostering collaboration. Join us as we uncover the essential steps and best practices for effectively managing a DevOps transformation in mainframe settings.
If I am leading a project, number one I'm gonna do is like, of course, make sure the tests are okay. Well, number one, you need to have a good architecture, a good strategy for your project to make sure that it will be finished on time. And then at the same time, you need to have a great tests because if you don't have good tests, that would bite you right back once it is implemented. So make sure that the tests are okay. And prioritization, I'm gonna say, in terms of project. Like you need to have a set of priorities where what's the important part, because it's possible that there would be challenges that you would face during a project implementation. So you need to identify which one is the top priority and maybe have a perfect test for that before you focus on other things. Yeah.
And foremost thing to understand is what are the metrics, the goals that we're trying to achieve that we're not achieving, and what's missing. And DevOps tooling and practices may be one of these, but sometimes it's not only that. Sometimes it's just the change management process that is not ideal. And even if you put tools and implement DevOps practices, you may have something on the organization that can't really keep up with the pace. So I think what we need to achieve and what's holding us back. And then second is defining the actual technical and process changes outside of the tool that we need to get in place. Okay, so let's assume that we still don't have a good process to manage code or to build and automate all the testing and release management. So get all of that sorted, get also the change management process improved. And then there's the last thing, which is ongoing monitoring of the outcomes, because it's not a one and done. It's not like we're going to put a bunch of tools and now you have the ability to deploy code to the mainframe. You actually need to continuously monitor and have explicit KPIs tied back to this first step, which is what's our goals and what's not working. Keep monitoring, because organizations change and evolve over time. So you do need to have visibility on what's happening. What's your time? And I can give some examples of works I've done with my customers. Things like defining a way to measure time to value, which is I as a business user have an idea, I want to implement this. This will require changes on, I know, my cloud environment or my data center applications or my mainframe or a combination of these on my databases. So from this idea to getting a solution identified to getting code implemented and running, what's my time to value? How many changes do I have every day, week, month? What's my release cadence? How many failures and rollbacks do I need to apply? Things like I don't know, a code churn rate. That's another example. Things like environmental impact of my applications, which is a very important topic. Can I actually not look at just pure application performance, but also look at the resources that my application needs to use? Because an interesting thing is the modern language do a lot of stuff, but they also, in some cases, become heavier. So there's a bit of a trade-off. Yeah, okay, I'm going to move from COBOL to Java, and I use some automation to get these new applications, but then suddenly I need 3 times or 4 times more compute resources compared to the previous one. What's my environmental impact? Maybe that's acceptable because there's also further changes that even it out. But I think there's considerations to be done, and you do need to gather data and keep monitoring and then act on it.
It's interesting answering this question as someone that does a lot of that in Galassa. And I think that what I have learned over my couple of years of being responsible for, things like this in Galassa is the three things that I would say are most important are really a solid build process. It needs to be robust, it needs to have concurrency, it needs to not have certain build pipelines and workflows that clash with each other and then cause issues, with that whole CI/CD process for your whole team. I think getting your build process right, obviously, there's going to be many different platforms and many different CI/CD tools that you can pick from that work for your organization or work for your team. But I think identifying that and then putting in place a really solid build process is 100% something that's going to make the lives of everyone in the team easier in the long run, not just for feature development, but when you come to releases and maybe when you come to adapt that build process in future, having something really solid in place is important. Secondly, security. I feel like this is kind of an obvious one, but maybe overlooked, is you need to, make sure that you're looking at all the security practices. So how you're handling credentials, certificates, things like that, vulnerabilities in your code, making sure that you're, especially in the open source world, making sure that you're up to date and using more recent versions of open source software and getting rid of any kind of security vulnerabilities you might have. And then thirdly, I think this is more important for an open source organization or project, but making sure that your build process and your release processes and also maybe your contribution processes are very transparent, because if you want people to be able to contribute to your project, obviously as an open source of people that are new and haven't done so before, it needs to be clear and transparent what someone needs to do to be able to contribute that feature back to you. So to do that, they need to be able to see your build process. They need to be able to know what happens in your release process and when is that feature going to be released and what's your release cycle and things like that. So yeah, I would say having a solid build process, making sure that you consider security as a priority, and then being, especially for an open source project, being very transparent and open as to what all of your DevOps processes are, is really important.
Obviously security, right? Not to compromise the security that's in place right now and to take advantage of the security that's there. Second would be to not to break anything that works now, right? So allow things to continue to function the way that they do now, but maybe enhancing them and taking them to the next level. So that would probably be my number 2. And then my number 3 would be continuous improvement, right? So how do we implement this in such a way that we don't paint ourselves into a corner, but leave ourselves room to be able to grow in the future, right? Those I would say are my top 3.
So first, you will need an environment where you will actually run the pipeline, regardless of whether you use Jenkins, GitHub Actions, run on-premise or whatever else. You will need a place where to run the pipelines. Then if you are starting, you need to go with one project that really desperately needs this agility alongside the people from this project to build the first pipeline, to understand what it would actually mean, what automation you need. You will probably run around Zoe or ZOAU because these are the tools that you can, and ZOSMF, because these are the tools that you can use to automate in the pipelines effectively. And once you have your first pipeline that can take the code, regardless of where you store it, whether it's Git, Endeavor, or other types of SCM, package it and store it in some enterprise-wide solution. Because we are talking about enterprises, it's not like it's their first pipeline ever. They already have some kind of pipeline. So most probably you will need to go to your distributed people and ask, hey, what tools do you use? Because you will anyway have to integrate with them. And then you will be using the tools that are available in the open source on the mainframe to shape your own pipelines to build the recommendations for your organizations, and then deploy your first pipelines, and then start monitoring them. Then you are getting into how do you observe all these environments, because Mainframe has a very good observability, but internally it doesn't integrate well so far with the external solutions. And so you will be looking at the vendors who can help you with integrate into the external solutions. And there are solutions for Mainframe now already. All these things are kind of like what you will need to do. And it's not necessarily because it doesn't exist on the Mainframe. It's because you want it in one place, and the Mainframe ones doesn't help you with the distributed. So you need to integrate the Mainframe in the distributed ones.
I was leading a DevOps. Just my first priority would be to get a good pipeline available, so that the second that anybody, you want to have visibility between somebody saying, here's a piece of function I want, and then when the developers work on it, you can see that they can tie it back. So having a ticketing system relating to the change to give you that visibility, and make sure that you have testing, automated testing. Sometimes the best way, when I write software, some of the best software teams that I've worked with, you almost write your test before you make the change. And before you change something, make sure you've got a test available for how the existing thing is supposed to work, to make sure that you haven't broken it, because then you'll become risk averse. Then basically the brakes go on and you might start slowing down. So get a good pipeline. Look at things like Jenkins. I mean, there are other great CI/CD tools out there. Look at things like Ansible. Those are the more interesting things I would do. It's a bit like painting. If you ever paint a room, painting is like 90% preparation. Like you have to take all the old paint off and clean it. And if you want your paint to last a long time, painting is easy, right? You just get a roller, and I don't want to say that painting isn't hard, right? But putting paint on is easy. Preparing for painting something, cleaning it, making the environment, covering everything so you don't get paint splatters, putting tape everywhere is difficult. So a lot of it's preparation. Getting code coverage tools available. That's what I would do. The most important thing for DevOps for me. And I'm also a big fan of something called pair programming. It's gone out of fashion a little bit right now. Creating pair programming and mentoring and buddying systems. So if you have a piece of work that needs to be done, make sure that two people work on it together, because that way they're sharing knowledge and problems, and you've got transfer. So if I ever get to be a DevOps manager, I would just say two people work on everything. So you haven't got everything in one person's head. Even if one person is the lead and the other person is following, and then they can always switch around. I think it's a great way to make progress.
Test-driven development is something in the industry, is huge at the moment, and has been for a couple of years. So I think building test cases alongside when you're developing is something that isn't practiced as much as it should be. But it means that if you're creating the test, if you know what the outcome is for what you're developing, that can be unbelievably beneficial. And it means that you're not retrofitting the test. Because often, if you're, for example, if you were writing an update to a mobile app, then if you know that you want to change a particular feature, you could say, oh, well, actually, you could write the test to say, to talk about the logic about why specifically you want to look at that particular piece of feature function you're changing, and code that at the same time, so that you're doing both. I think I wouldn't say that would be my top priority, but I think that's definitely something that's really really key when you're looking at moving into DevOps. I think a huge part of it is bringing people in that are motivated. I think for me, if your team are motivated to change and they want to do something different, that is 90% of the challenge, because they will go, and if you force upon them process and you force upon them, this is the tools that we're going to use and we have to do this, people don't like that very much. I think you really have to be able to ask the team to go and explore different solutions to a problem. Ansible is not the only way to provision regions and to instigate infrastructure as code, but you need to let your team go and look at different ways of finding solutions before you get imposed. So I think for me, it's around, what is it that they're trying to gain? Is it that they're trying to gain more reliability? Is it that they're trying to gain more security? Is it that they're trying to gain a quicker release process? I think you need to determine that, and then you work backwards, whether that's test-driven development, whether that's implementing a migration from into more modern GitHub, Git type source control. I think you need to look at what it is that you're trying to achieve at the end of that and break it down, because I think DevOps is just such a buzzword that it doesn't really mean anything. It's about what is the outcome that you're trying to get and working back from that?
Test, test, and test. Those are my 3 priorities. So make sure that the change works first. Make sure the change works when it's integrated with the rest of the platform, and test your back out. Break something. That's, what do they call that? Is it chaos engineering that Netflix have adopted, which is where they actually break stuff on purpose in their test environments to see whether the application keeps on running. I think that has got a lot to say for itself. So break something on purpose in the testing cycle, just to see what happens, to make sure that you can back it out correctly, and then it's restored to perfect functionality after your back out. Another thing that I've experienced, and that I couldn't recommend more, is a production-like environment. So deploy a change as if it was in production in your production test environment, and just make sure that it works. That's the deployment bit. Another test would be, does it do what it's supposed to? So that's where the security bit of DevSecOps comes in. Is does it do what it's supposed to? Does it surprise you when it runs? You know, it shouldn't surprise you. It should do what it's supposed to. It should do what it's allowed to, and it shouldn't do anything else other than what it's supposed to. So that builds security into your deployment. I think that's all I have to say about that.
Get people to understand that they need to change, figure out the rules that they have to follow that cause them to have to change, and then give them a pipeline that allows them to move effectively. So in IBM CIO, one of my first tasks is to help our teams move from legacy processes to modern DevOps process. And so the first thing we did was explain why and what, build a pipeline so that they could onboard onto the pipe, and then work with a number of teams so that they could onboard. And then that shows everyone else that they can move to. And so you get some key adopters, you get some key teams onto the pipeline, and then you can get the rest of the teams moving. I also use IBM security standards as another push to move to the pipeline, because it does provide additional security characteristics, additional scanning, secret scanning, things that one needs to do that aren't available in the old process. And so those are the things that I did to help people modernize and change the process. But it's people. You have to get people. So we also did a learn, do, teach program, so people could learn, do, and then teach their fellow app teams on how to do the transition.
Secure development is the first thing, that you don't receive attacks anywhere. Automated deployments, that you don't have to do every time the same things. Third would be also regulatory updates, that also the operating systems and everything else and the containers will be up to date and secure.